27th of the 10th, 2022. And today I want to comment on a topic that has... Actually, I want to comment on two topics. These two topics, these are very common. Like, these are very common topics in the human society, in the current society. Like, everywhere in the world, no matter where you live in the world, you most likely have heard of the two topics that I want to comment on today. I keep saying comment on because what I'm going to say here is merely my opinion and what I think, based on the knowledge that I have on these topics. And this is, when I say based on the knowledge that I have, this means like actual, knowledge from research, not just me talking out of my ass. Anyway, the two topics that I want to comment on today, the number one topic is economic sanctions, right? Economic sanctions. And the second topic I want to comment on is inflation, right? Those are the two subjects that I want to comment on today, starting with number one, economic sanctions. The word economic sanctions is spread around a lot. Like, you hear this word a lot, especially if you're Zimbabwe. Mazimba, I don't think there's a Zimbabwean person who has never heard the word sanctions. It might not be said in full like it is, like economic sanctions. It is usually just referred to as sanctions. And the reason why I want to comment on this today, on these topics, is we use this word sanctions. Yeah? Everybody talking about sanctions, everybody saying Zimbabwean economy is down due to these sanctions. But do we know what sanctions are? Do you know what sanctions are? You just hear the politician, you just hear Emerson Mnangagwa and his people, his ZANU-PF people, everyone in ZANU-PF will tell you that the economy is not functioning because of sanctions. And the problem is a lot of us just tend to believe it, and we just tend to take it that way and say, the sanctions. But do we know? Does anyone really know what these sanctions are? I found with a lot of people who say, Zimbabwe, things are the way they are in Zimbabwe because of sanctions. And right, first of all, for you to understand something, obviously you have to know what it is, right? For you to understand how it's affecting even your life as a person, because whenever we're talking about the economy or the socio-economic state of a country, we are not just talking about a country as it is seen on a map, because in reality a country is the people, right? Saka, when we're talking about these things, we are talking about how they affect you as an individual, right? Economic sanctions is a mantra. Like, every corrupt government official that I have seen in Zimbabwe as of today, they all chant this song of sanctions. They all blame the sanctions. But I've never actually heard anyone in a public space, on social media or wherever, I've never actually heard anyone from Zimbabwe trying to explain to the average Zimbabwean what a sanction is, right? We might have a limited understanding of what sanctions are, or we might not even have an understanding of what sanctions are. But then we are being made to sing this mantra, economic sanctions, sanctions are some sanctions are and those in political power today, they blame sanctions because they know that people don't actually know what these sanctions are and what these sanctions mean to those people, to individual people. Average people, like average citizens, they don't know. But unfortunately, the ruling party will take advantage of this lack of knowledge by the people and use it to its advantage to remain in power. Right? Sanctions, these economic sanctions that we keep hearing about. Ma sanctions, angori ma limits in a form of speaking. These are limitations that are placed on either a country or a people. And when it comes to Zimbabwe, the thing is, one place under my economic sanctions because what number one important fact that very few people know, like very Zimbabwean people understand. Kuti, whenever you hear the word sanctions in Zimbabwe, first of all, you should acknowledge Kuti, sanctions in application to Zimbabwe, they are targeted economic sanctions. Zimbabwe in itself as a country is not under sanctions. And this is what the these political cowards do. They will not tell you this. Kuti, no, you, the people of Zimbabwe, are not under economic sanctions. It is I, Ningi, as an individual who has been placed under economic sanctions because of this and this and this and this and this. No one will explain that to you unless you go out of your way to find it out for yourself. And this brings me to another important thing. Kuti, ngatisararamei life yedu tisingazive zvinhu zvinoaffecta life yedu, tisina ruzivo nezvezvinhu zvinoaffecta life yedu. We should have the knowledge. As people, we should have the knowledge on all things that affect our lives. Right? All things that affect our lives, we should have the knowledge. You would want knowledge on anything that would affect your life. You would want knowledge on whether the landlord is going to chase you out of the house at the end of the month. You would want notice, right? You would want knowledge prior to that happening. You would want knowledge on anything. It could be anything trivial even that will affect your life as an individual. So now imagine how important it is to have knowledge on things that directly affect your life in an indirect way. Right? And economic sanctions is one of those things. Setara Kwandaita, no one will tell you Zimbabwean economic sanctions, in as far as economic sanctions are concerned, and Zimbabwe itself as a country, as a whole, me as a Zimbabwean citizen and you as a Zimbabwean citizen, we are not under sanctions. Zimbabwe as a country, as a sovereign state, is not under sanctions. All the sanctions that are in place in relation to Zimbabwe are targeted economic sanctions, targeted towards certain individuals. And the thing is, these are the same individuals that come to you and they tell you, Kuti, the state of the economy is this way because of economic sanctions. They omit to tell you, Kuti, no man, the state of the economy is this way because of economic sanctions that are placed upon me as an individual for committing such and such acts. And because I am in this position of power, the economic sanctions that are going to be placed upon me are going to be also indirectly placed upon you. Yeah? Because I'm in a position of power, any economic sanctions that are imposed on me will have a direct effect on you because of the position that I hold as a political person or a political individual or whatever. They won't tell you that. They will not tell you these things. Why? Because they benefit. Like, don't even think for a second, but when you hear my government officials, when you hear the president even calling for the removal of economic sanctions, that he has you as a Zimbabwean at heart, or he has the economy of Zimbabwe at heart. He does not. They're just using that as an excuse, as a scapegoat, to defer you from the real issue, from the real problem. Kuti what is causing this economic strife in our country? Chichi kumbokonzeresa kuti vanhu vatambure munyika medu, chichi kuita kuti economy yedu irambe yakadhakwa. They won't tell you because these economic sanctions, they work for them. Yeah? Once economic sanctions are removed, you actually find that once economic sanctions are removed, the looting and corruption that prevails will be greatly affected, and which is in reality the only reason why we should want these economic sanctions to be removed. But otherwise, in this issue of economic sanctions, we are all busy pointing at the symptom. We are pointing at the symptom instead of pointing at the cause. Economic sanctions are not what causes a country's economy to crash, or a country's economy to be dysfunctional in a way as the Zimbabwean economy is. Economic sanctions are merely a symptom of economic failure. Economic sanctions are merely a symptom of economic failure. Economic failure, like the question that you should be asking is, why are these economic sanctions in place in the first place? Why were these economic sanctions put in place to begin with? Those are the important questions. And like I'm saying, I will say this again, I will repeat it for clarity. Kuti ma sanctions are kuimbwa nemunhu wese, economic sanctions are not a cause of economic failure. They are a symptom. I'm pretty sure everyone understands the relationship between causation and symptoms. Once you see a symptom, you don't point at the symptom and say that symptom is what has caused this disease. And you see a symptom and then you know that there is a disease. But you don't point at the symptom and call it the disease. You can't do that. Yeah? But this is what our political leaders do. This is what the people in power do. They point at a symptom and try to blame it for being the disease, while it's actually ignoring the disease. You get me? And because maybe chirwere chatiri kudhila nacho hatinyatso as Zimbabwean people in general, like we lack knowledge in a lot of subjects, and economics is one of them. Because we do not pretty much understand how economics work, we fail to see when these political cronies point at a symptom and try to blame it for being the disease, because isusupela on our own we don't know to identify kuti no man, this is a disease and this is a symptom. And that comes only from acquiring knowledge on how the economy works on a micro level and on a macro level. And it's right. Another thing, when we go back again to my sanctions, this may not be known facts, but I will tell you this now. First of all, Zimbabwe doesn't need anything from America or the West or any of the countries that has imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe, right? But like I said, keep in mind, these sanctions are not placed on Zimbabwe per se; they are placed on certain individuals. But for the sake of this presentation to go forward, I'll just say the economic sanctions that were placed on Zimbabwe. All the countries, if you look at all the countries that have placed economic sanctions on Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe in itself does not need anything from those countries. That is from an economic point of view. From an economic point of view, from someone who understands economics and someone who understands how economies work, they will tell you straight away, because they know kuti Zimbabwe doesn't need anything. Zimbabwe doesn't need anything from America. In fact, you don't get anything from America despite of sanctions being there or not being there. What have you ever heard of any imports that come from America except the American dollar, which is in itself another topic that we need to discuss, the American dollar. And have you ever heard of food coming from America, unless it's like food aid from non-governmental organizations, which I doubt it even comes from America directly. They just facilitate food to be brought from elsewhere to come to Zimbabwe. Have you ever heard of Zimbabwe importing anything from Britain? Have you ever heard Zimbabwe importing anything from any Western country? The only country that you know for a fact that Zimbabwe imports things from there is China. And yet, Zimbabwe does not have any economic sanctions in China. Yeah? And when you come back and look at it, you actually find that not only does Zimbabwe not need anything from all the countries that has economic sanctions placed on it, all the countries that has economic sanctions placed on Zimbabwe need something from Zimbabwe. All the countries, I'll say that again, all the countries that have economic sanctions imposed on Zimbabwe definitely have something they need that is in Zimbabwe. They need something from Zimbabwe, right? I will clarify. The amount of raw materials that come out of Zimbabwe going to wherever, going to China, for example, right? It's not like all the raw materials that come out of Zimbabwe or Africa as a whole going to China are coming back to Africa. All the raw materials that are taken out of poor countries, that are taken out of Africa, they go to China or wherever in Asia. They are manufactured into finished goods and they are sent to the first world. So who needs who in this equation? Who needs who in this equation? Every cell phone, every laptop, every computer in every household in the first world, even the building materials they're using in the first world, right? The building materials they're using in America, the building materials they're using in Australia or whatever. Nema phone, computers, all that shit, The raw materials come from Africa, the raw materials come from Zimbabwe, the raw materials come from Mozambique, the raw materials come from Congo, the raw materials come from Zambia, the raw materials come from Africa. And manufactured in China, the people who have economic sanctions on you then get the finished product. Saka, when you look at that equation, who needs whom? Should the economic sanctions in place here that are in question, should they even matter in reality? They should not matter. They shouldn't matter. Like, it's like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy here. Because these guys have placed economic sanctions on Zimbabwe, yeah? But in reality, Zimbabwe doesn't need anything, nothing at all from all the countries that have placed economic sanctions on Zimbabwe, right? But why don't we know this? Isusu sema Zimbabweans, we don't know this. We don't know this, one, because we don't understand what these economic sanctions are, and the politicians blame the economic sanctions. They come and tell us, no, our economy is this way because of the economic sanctions, right? That's number one. That's why we don't know this. And we buy it, right? We buy it, we take it out. My sanctions, my sanctions. You hear everyone chanting the sanctions mantra, right? But Basnambo question okay, why were their sanctions placed in place in the first place? What are these sanctions even? Because you can't just say sanctions. Sanctions is not a definitive word. You have to know what are these sanctions. What do they mean? What do these sanctions say? What do they hinder that is making economic progress in Zimbabwe impossible? Those are the questions that people should be asking, but nobody asks those questions. People just look for a scapegoat, and because the ones who are holding all the political power do not want to hold the political power because it relies on people having scapegoats, not pointing direct fingers at them. No, you guys, we are not stupid. Economic sanctions are irrelevant to Zimbabwe. They shouldn't. They can place all the economic sanctions they want. They can place all the economic sanctions they want on all of Africa. But you find Guti, as long as the African people change their mindset and we don't have corrupt and selfish, greedy people in power who are holding all the reins of the economy, you find Guti, in a world like that, the Western world, everyone who are developed as of today can place as much economic sanctions as they want on Africa. But the end result is they are going to start running out of the shit that they need, that comes out of Africa. But because we have corrupt individuals in power, in most cases, I strongly believe that these corrupt individuals are actually placed in power by America and other, powerful countries or individuals, if you may. If those people were taken out of the picture, economic sanctions wouldn't mean shit. Like, they can place all the economic sanctions they would want, but that would only be like driving a knife through your own heart. Yeah? The only why these economic sanctions are in place today and they seem to work, or like they seem to not have any effect on the Western world, is because of the levels of corruption and selfish greed that has captured the whole of the African continent, right? Because, mind you, if we separate economics from politics, right, Africa has got all the resources, yeah? Africa has got all the resources you can think of. And the current hegemon, or the current, so prevailing socio-economic world in the West, be it in America, be it in Britain, be it in Europe, be it in Australia, that prevailing first world living strongly depends on the resources that are coming out of Africa. They strongly depend on the resources that come out of the third world. Yeah? And all we need is people who have the third world people at heart, not selfish and corrupt and greedy people like the ones we have in power today. Yeah? Right. That's my take on the subject of sanctions. And it really annoys me to keep hearing people to keep hearing this being a subject. Even like a day ago, I think the current Zimbabwean government had children and people marching along the streets for economic sanctions. That's just a distraction. You know, it's a distraction. It's lies they are perpetuating, just trying to close your eyes to the truth, to the reality that no, man, there's something definitely wrong with the way you are running the country, the way you are governing, and the way you are allocating resources. And now you're trying to blame the symptom of that on economic sanctions. You're trying to blame the result of that on economic sanctions, rather. You're trying to blame the result of that on a symptom of it. Yeah? That's my take on economic sanctions. Economic sanctions do not mean shit. They're like I don't even know how to express it. They are the worst lie that the Zimbabwean people have been told. Because sanctions, but nobody ever explains what these sanctions are. So yeah, it is important for us to know. It is important for us to understand what these sanctions are. What do these sanctions mean? What do these sanctions do? Why are these sanctions being blamed for our economic failure? Yeah? Once we understand that, and I think I've kind of highlighted pretty clearly what it all means when we're talking about sanctions. And don't think of sanctions as some sort of embargo or rule that is placed against Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe cannot get this or cannot get that. Even if it was, there is nothing that is outside of Zimbabwe that it needs that badly for its economy to fail. Yeah? Right. Anyway, I'll move on. The next topic, like I said from the beginning, is inflation, which is another topic. Yaguti, everybody be out here blaming inflation. Inflation yauraya economy. Economy yedu yadakwiswa inflation mawani zvinu inflation. Do we even know what inflation is? Nobody knows what inflation is. People assume what inflation is. People take inflation for what they are told it is, most usually by government officials. But in reality, inflation is just the devaluation of your money, right? Why do you think Zimbabwean economy reach record levels of inflation, like historically? Because like when you're looking at inflation, you're just not just looking at one country. Inflation happens everywhere around the world. So why is it inflation in Zimbabwe was so bad, or in Venezuela was so bad that the economy literally crashed? Yeah. Why is it other countries like the United States never face levels of inflation that lead to the complete collapse of their economies. And it is understanding what these things are and clearly outlining what these things are and what they mean that can only be helpful for us because from my point of view, it seems as if we don't have economists in Zimbabwe. We don't have people who can come up with theories, or people who can do economic forecasts and all that kind of shit. But in reality, they are there. Takaenda kuma high school tikatichwa economics, tikaenda kuma college tikatichwa this and that. How many graduates have we? Like, are you telling me that UZ is not pumping out graduates that study economics and all that kind of stuff? Huh? Because what we need in relation to both inflation and sanctions, what we need is economic policies that work for us. We need economic policies that are not based on those which were formulated in the West. You know what I mean? We need economic policies that work for the people of Africa. We need economic policies that look at the benefit of African people first before anyone else. Because our current prevailing economic policies that we use in Africa, they've never, like you find every country in Africa almost, this is not a fact, this is me just guessing, but I know a lot of people, a lot of countries rather in Africa, their economic policies, they circle around paying back debt to the IMF and the World Bank. They all owe money to the IMF and the World Bank. Why? Did you need the IMF and the World Bank money? No, you did not. But because you built your economies based on the policies that were created by the creators of the IMF and the fucking World Bank, that's why you owe the IMF and the World Bank a lot of money. Your resources are distributed unevenly because you're trying to pay back an impossible debt to repay. Yeah? It's baffling, yeah? When I think of it, I just think we need economic policies that work for Africa. That means when our economists are formulating policies, they should be looking at what can we do that can benefit the African people first before we allocate any resources to go to outside of Africa. But because we have corrupt officials formulating our economic policies, and our economic policies that they are building on are already founded upon the economic policies that are meant to not see them succeed, this is why we can never have fully successful economies in Africa. Because that's the problem. I think in my last video I was talking about third world and first world and all that kind of stuff. The problem is we're all looking up to these first world countries here. We're all looking up to these first world countries and going, we want to be like them. But in reality, we don't want to be like them. We want what works for us as the African continent, as Zimbabweans, and I'm speak for Zimbabweans because I'm from Zimbabwe. We want what works for the people of Africa. And any policy that involves borrowing money from the IMF and the World Bank is not going to benefit the people of Africa. Any policy that involves any of Africa's resources leaving the country to begin with, leaving the continent, are not going to work for the African people. Because when you look at it, these are known facts. These are known facts, Kuti. When you look at it, majority of the resources, they come from Africa, right? But Africa is the poorest continent in the world. How does that work? It doesn't work. That's because our economic policies that we formulate in our African countries are emanating from the West. They're emanating from America. They're emanating from American economists. They're emanating from how they do things there, or how they do things that side. We do not build our own. We don't build our own policies. We don't build our own way of doing things. We're just trying to emulate and copy what's already been. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. If someone has been doing something quite well for a while, you can emulate and copy it, but that doesn't mean that you can't improve on it. You can also emulate and copy someone and still improve on it. But then, if you want to copy and emulate someone, that's when only you know that the way this person has been doing it actually works. It has been actually been said that the way of life of the first world that we so much envy is unsustainable and doesn't work for the planet as a whole. Why do we keep trying to emulate it then? Yeah? And it hurts me so much that it's this kind of knowledge that's not out there. People don't know these things or don't understand these things. But reality is the way things are done should change, should be completely different. It should not even be trying to catch up with like first world countries or whatever. We should be formulating ways of life, economies that work for the African people. This probably means formulating something that has never been heard of or ever been seen in the world. Yeah. But anyway, what do I know? I'm just a kid from the ghetto.